For the better part of the last century, it felt like the world kind of operated on a set of predictable rules. But if you've been feeling lately like things are getting a lot more chaotic, a lot more unpredictable, well, you're not wrong. That stable world order we all kind of took for granted, it's changing, and it is changing fast. So let's just jump right in with a pretty huge question. Is the world order you grew up with just over? I mean, it's a wild thought, right? But the analysis we're going to dig into today suggests we are smack in the middle of this massive structural shift in global power. And there's actually a name for this new era that experts are starting to use, the Great Fragmentation. The whole idea is pretty simple, really. We've gone from this very integrated global system to one that's, well, it's breaking apart. It's fracturing into competing groups, shifting alliances, and all those common rules that used to hold everything together, they're getting weaker. Okay, so take a look at how this breaks down the last 50 years or so. It's fascinating. According to the Institute for Economics and Peace, we've basically lived through 3 distinct phases. You had the Cold War, right? That stable, two-sided world. Then, after 91, this explosion of rapid globalization. But here's the kicker, the point that changes everything. That 2008 financial crisis, it wasn't just about the economy. It was the starting gun for the phase we're in right now, the Great Fragmentation. And look, this isn't some minor tweak to the system. The data is pretty clear. The geopolitical risks we're facing today, we're talking record military spending, weaker international institutions, are actually higher than they were during the Cold War. Think about that for a second. This is a fundamental shift in how stable the world is. So what does this fragmentation actually look like out there on the world stage? Well, it's totally reshaping the global power hierarchy. And to get a handle on it, we can break it down into a few key tiers. Right, to really get this shift, we've got to know who the players are. At the top, you have the superpowers. That's the US and China, the ones who can really shape things on their own. Then you've got the great powers, countries like the UK, France, Japan. They have a ton of regional influence, but they need partners to make the big moves. And finally, you have this rising group of middle powers, think Brazil or Turkey, who are making waves in their own regions, usually by working together. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking this new, messy era is just about the US versus China, right? But the data shows something really fascinating. Since about 2015, the ability for both superpowers to really expand their influences kind of stalled out. They've basically hit a plateau. And you can see those new limits right here. Take the US. The dollar's dominance isn't what it used to be. Its share of global reserves has dropped quite a bit. And then look at China. Foreign investment has absolutely collapsed. So yeah, the two giants are still on top, but they've clearly hit some kind of ceiling. But here's what's so important to understand. While the superpowers have hit that plateau, the really dramatic story is happening one level down. The true hollowing out of the old world order. It's the decline of those traditional great powers.
Let's just take Japan as a perfect example. Back in 1995, its economy was an absolute behemoth. I mean, it made up almost 18% of the entire world's GDP. Just incredible.
Okay, now fast forward to 2023. Look at that number. That share has collapsed to just 4%. That is a staggering drop in relative economic power. And this chart just puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? When you see it visually like this, those abstract numbers suddenly feel very, very real. And hey, Japan isn't alone here. Germany's share of global GDP nearly got cut in half during that same time. The old economic engines are just losing steam. So as these old powers fade, what's taking their place? This visual really tells the story. Look at the world in 1991 on the left. Power is pretty concentrated in a few key places. Now look at the right. That's today. It's this much denser, way more complicated web of influence. Those middle powers we talked about, they are stepping up and acting for themselves. And look, these big geopolitical shifts aren't just theoretical, They have very real, tangible consequences for the global economy, especially when you start talking about currency and debt. So what does this new multipolar world actually mean for our money, for finance? Well, according to one analysis, it's creating 2 huge economic pressures that are basically forcing countries to rethink their entire game plan. And here they are. First, as the world keeps fragmenting, a lot of nations are actively searching for ways to build economic systems that aren't tied to the US dollar. And second, at the same time, the US itself is facing this just immense challenge of its own national debt. And when I say immense, I mean look at that number. Over $33 trillion. It's a number so big it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And trying to manage that debt in a world that's actively trying to move away from the dollar? Yeah, that creates a seriously complicated problem. So, how on earth does a country even begin to deal with a debt that large? Well, there's this one potential tool, something Japan has been using since 2016, called yield curve control. To put it really simply, it's when a central bank just forces long-term interest rates to stay low, even when inflation is taking off. And there's this quote from the source material that just nails it. It calls it an escape route from debt that leans on inflation as a subtle decayer of real value. In other words, it's a way out that uses inflation to slowly, quietly eat away at the real value of all that debt. You're basically paying back your loans with money that's worth less than when you borrowed it. And this is where it all comes full circle. In a world where the currency system is fragmenting and you've got major economies potentially inflating away their debt, what do other countries do? They look for safety. They look for something real. And that's why central banks are buying up gold at record levels. It's a move to grab tangible assets and shore up their economic independence for this new, really uncertain era.
All right, so let's pull all this together. We've seen the fragmentation, we've seen the decline of the old guard, and we've seen the economic ripple effects. So what does it all add up to? What is this new reality we're all trying to navigate?
Well, here's the lay of the land. First off, power isn't concentrated anymore, it's spread out. Second, you have this growing class of middle powers who are acting on their own terms, and they're not interested in just picking a side between the US and China. And finally, and this is a big one, the very things that used to tie us together in globalization, from supply chains to finance, are now being used as weapons in this new competition.
So the big takeaway here is that this new world is, without a doubt, a lot more complex and way less predictable. And yeah, that brings new risks, for sure. But it also creates new opportunities. I mean, with more players on the field, you get more chances for mediation, for new kinds of alliances, and for some really creative diplomacy to solve problems. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? The one we'll be grappling with for decades. For the better part of a century, we basically knew who set the agenda. But in this new, fragmented world where power is fractured and influence is totally up for grabs, who gets to write the new rules?